Hello and good evening to the Western region of Young Rail Professionals' second webinar this year, which is everything you could want to know about real-time trains. For those that don't know, Young Rail Professionals is an organisation set up to help promote rail industry as a great place to work. We do this through 3 different channels to try and inspire the next generation of railway workers into the industry to help develop young people within the industry already to reach their full potential and just overall promote the rail industry to outsiders as a good place to work. If you want to find out more, please give us a search at youngrailpro.com and make sure you signed up to the Western Region group because after all, this is a Western Region presentation. This evening, I've kindly got Tom Cairns along, who is the founder of SW Lines Limited, who has created the website you all know, Realtime Trains. He's going to take us through everything you'd possibly want to know about it. So with no further ado, I will hand over to Tom.
Thank you, Wilson. Hello, everyone. As Wilson said, this is, I guess, everything that you could want to know about real-time trains. I'm calling it the speed run version, as it probably would take quite a few hours for me to go through it in full detail. Or you can probably consider it the version where I give out all my trade secrets, but we'll see where it goes. So just to give you an idea as to what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to give you a bit about me, a bit of a potted history of the site, some things that I've been up to recently, roughly how it works, a couple of memes, a couple of jokes maybe, and what I've been working on at the moment. And then towards the end, I will talk you through sort of the things that I've been working on, and hopefully will see the light of day next year, maybe, I hope. I live in perpetual hope. So about me, I have had a somewhat active interest in rail from quite an early age. I say that although over the past few years, I suspect I've best described as lost a bit of interest to the degree that people say that I don't like trains anymore. But I guess that's part of the course when you work in the industry in which your hobby is. I commuted for 6 years to college. So from 2008, I started commuting and then university, and I finished commuting in 2014-15 as I finished my degree. A lot of this has sort of resulted in what we see today and what I do. Certainly with real-time trains, its birth was out of some frustration and some wants as to what I would like to see. When I started commuting to and from college, I wrote a piece of software called Rail Miles, which is a journey logging tool for rail enthusiasts, with which everyone can log exactly what train they've been on, how late it was, how early it was, exactly what numbers were on it, for those who like that kind of thing. And that was 2008. And as I've thought about it over the recent years, real-time trains has sort of become a thing which just makes my life easier when I'm trying to log my journeys by rail. My utopia has always been to be able to type in an origin, a destination, and a departure time, and just have everything done for me. But that's possibly out of laziness. Although, having said that, if I'm lazy, then I don't really see why I've spent it's probably about 10 years working on this kind of thing now. In 2011, 2012, RTT sort of became a thing. I started working on it while I was at university. So that's sort of a brief history. More recently, my primary job, I say primary, it basically is my job, is working on real-time trains and the various software solutions that sit around it. A bit of a potted history then about real-time trains. Obviously, I said it started in 2012 following Network Rail's open data release. The open data system, I think it was around April, May 2012 that I started becoming aware of it. And there are many people who were responsible for that, some of whom I imagine are watching this, and certainly led it to where it is today. And I think the entire industry is probably thankful for those people and their work in trying to release that. For me, I wrote it mostly to help my needs and solve my commuting woes at the time. So I was frequently mistrusting of the data on the platform, the data on my phone app. I didn't know where the train was. It was a poor experience, and I always felt that I could do it better. And by doing it better, I felt, well, I will trust my own rubbish um, more than anyone else's rubbish, I guess is the way I would describe it. And the prime example of rubbish, I guess, is the fact that on that screen there, that's a departure board at Southampton Central Station back in 2012, I think it was, and it's completely blank. And that's a prime example of the kind of experience that we commuters back then were experiencing. The station platforms frequently had blank displays and things like that. You had to be educated in the knowledge of what you're expecting train-wise. So over the years, we've had 3 versions. Version 1 was October 2012. Version 2 was August 2013, as I was quite quickly fed up with the version in October 2012, and it was a very basic implementation of the rail data that was available. Version 2 sort of elaborated on that, started to add a bit more signaling data and get some more accurate timings in there. And version 3, which was released 14 months ago now, was the starting point for the future of what happened this year. This year's been an interesting year for all of us, and I certainly hope everyone has stayed healthy and safe. But this year for real-time trains has been, I expected it to be a quiet one, and it turned out to be what I can only describe as a very busy one. So a bit about version 3. It was a radical facelift, and as you can see by the meme, Rail enthusiasts did not like it. The amount of bad comments I had was unbelievable from enthusiasts. From everyone else, it was absolutely fine. But enthusiasts, it was not pleasant, but it was, you get by. There are a number of minor functionality improvements, but facelift was the primary part of it, and the provision for a number of new features, which of course come to fray this year, including Know Your Train and Track Your Train. The signal in the bottom left-hand corner, if anyone's managed to end up on an error page on the site, you'll probably be familiar with that kind of signal. And the more technically inclined of us are probably aware of the hypertext coffee pot control protocol, which you get that signal on one of the pages of the site. If you can go and find it, good luck. It's hidden away somewhere, but it should be relatively easy to find if you know what you're looking for. Growth of the site over the last 8 years. Wow, that's scary. Is it 8 years? Yeah, 8 years this year. It's now in its 9th year. That is a really scary prospect. The primary measure of growth that I have for the site is through the website usage and just the analytics that I have on the site and various traffic analysis. As you can see, that graph down there is a broad straight line-ish, although having said that, in 2019, which is last year, you can sort of see the spikes up there. The traffic was up by over a quarter compared to 2018's average. I'm not entirely sure why it increased that degree. 2020 was certainly looking like it was going to be a very busy year for the site in terms of providing people information and people using the site. But of course, I think we all know what happened there. RTT isn't just a website, it's integrated into lots of other software and hardware products. So the software products include people like Citymapper, who have a journey planning and live departure system inside their app, and Real-Time Trains is one of the data sources that they use. And hardware products are things like the UK departure boards, which are an individual makes, or his company now even, he makes departure boards sort of like what you can find on stations, and you can buy those, and Real-Time Trains is one of the data options to go into that. It's also integrated into a couple of industry products, which are used by staff in the most part, mostly operational staff. So it's got a decent spread across the industry, and I wouldn't say necessarily in hearts and minds and everyone, but it's certainly in more places than you might expect. The awareness increase over the years has tended to be word of mouth, but there are some really, really noticeable bumps sometimes. So this is a monthly graph, but as I look at sort of the more detailed days of trips, Flying Scotsman and Tornado tend to be two of the main growers of traffic. Once they sort of visit, they never go away. You can really see the traffic being retained when those two locomotives are out. The other train that causes people to become aware of the site is the Christmas train, Sierra 73184, which I've now done for 8 years on the trot. So the first year I did it was the first year of RTT, and it's never really gone away. It's a really interesting technical train service challenge to implement, as you never really expect one train to visit 2,550 odd stations all at the same time. So it's one of those where I have to really hack apart the system to make it work, but it's been one of those which has really not only driven traffic to the site, but it gives people a good feeling. And certainly this year it's going to be there's another new thing coming on it. And over the years, people like LNER, Network Rail, Northern have all got involved in some way, shape. Can't remember what the rest of that word should be. In some way. And also, as an example of some of the hardware integration products that sort of pin off the back of RTT, I've included the Christmas train there from last year on my departure board, which it's always a bizarre sight to see that appear. On the right is an interesting map. So the Christmas train normally has a bit of a different calling point pattern, and it's the first few years it was just a random order. 1 year it was just all the stations in alphabetical order. This year it's a bit more geographically inclined, and this map is the route it takes. It covers 11,000 miles, I believe. That's in straight line distance, not rail distance. As you can see, there's quite a few more railways that have been created, certainly across North England and right through the sea from the far north of Scotland. But the way it works, basically, it's a kind of graph traversal algorithm, which this year I've started it in Pilning. There's an interesting bot which tweets out trains at Pilning Station, because it only receives 2 a week. And a few years ago, I accidentally made it tweet out all 2,500 stations by changing something in the API. So it's sort of become a thing. So now they're at the beginning this year, North Pole International straight to Pilning, and then the rest of the network. So at Pilning Station, if you want to go and see if that bot breaks, it might. The other interesting thing about the Christmas train is it's the only train ever to have brought the website down. Last year we had the number of people looking at it simultaneously at just before midnight was in the region of about 25,000 people. The number of refreshers that were also being done by departure board systems and apps on the site took it down to the degree we were seeing. I think it was something in the region of about 120,000 hits a minute on the API. So this year I've expanded the capacity, but I find it quite entertaining that the fake train that I put in once a year is the only time it's ever been able to bring it down. So that's enough about Christmas train. So how it works. This is probably self-evident to some people who know how the industry systems work, but there's lots of different feeds. You've got primarily things like trust, train describer, which is TD, schedules, and this year I've added allocations into it. They all go into the green processing engine that I've got there and eventually come out to the website and the API. That's what you see on the public kind of things. But I have to say, the bit that I've put on the right, the Voyager of data discovery, Voyager purely because we could. It sort of works on how my mind has gone over the last few years with how data has become available or not become available to RTT to use. So I certainly started on schedules. I remember thinking in late 2011 when I got access to them that, wow, okay, that's an interesting start. Real-time running information was more interesting, and my mind was a bit more blown that was possible to get the kind of raw or more raw process level data. The signaling data, so things like you see on the open train times maps, TrackC, Railcam, that kind of data, when you really delve into it and see the art of the possible, it blows your mind somewhat. And the last bit, train numbers, it's one of those things that the industry has long said it's really hard to do. And I totally agree, it is really hard to do. But the fact that it's now possible and the industry is sort of moving along with it, and it's looking like it will end up being open data soon, I hope. I think it's one of those things that lots of people have lots of really good ideas about it, and the fact that that is possible despite the industry having said for a long time that the number of systems you have to interface with to make this possible, the challenge was there. I took the challenge, and the fact that it's now a thing is quite something for me. It makes me happy, and I think, I guess for rail enthusiasts, which are it's about a quarter of users of the site now, I suspect that's best described as utopia. So what it doesn't do so well, I figured I'd get this out of the way quite early on. People who saw the YRP disruption thing about 6 months ago will be familiar with this slide. I've slightly modified it, but it's a representation of it. RTT just doesn't just do it badly, the industry does it badly. RTT struggles with disruption where there's lots of cancellations. The industry isn't that great at it either. This is primarily due to a disparity of information between systems. So operational systems such as Trust and passenger-facing systems such as Darwin frequently disagree. And they don't just disagree with each other, they quite frequently disagree with reality. To me, this is a problem. I've long accepted that this is a problem that RTT has, and it's a problem that every system has. And it actually upsets me. When we do passenger information in the railway, people want information the most when there's a problem, and therefore we should do our utmost to get the accuracy the highest when there is a problem. At the moment, the industry ends up in this weird state where you've got different systems saying different things. They both could be somewhat correct, but they both could be somewhat wrong. There's some operators are pretty good at always getting it right. Some operators are pretty good at always getting it wrong. But there's a general acceptance that because of the direction of travel and passenger-facing systems, such as Darwin, should be the be-all and end-all. As long as everyone's showing the wrong thing, it's absolutely fine. To me, that's never been something that we should be striving for. We should be striving for consistent with reality, not consistent with ourselves. And it's the problem that we've got is when we really have major disruption, the way the industry flows, we tend to staff for the normal and a bit over the normal. But when you've got the train plan being thrown out the window for whatever reason, it just goes in the bin, to be honest. Information accuracy, timeliness, it's disregarded. The prime example that I've got here was from earlier this year. There was a freight train derailment at Eastleigh, which some of you may be familiar with. and trains down my part of the woods, so to Bournemouth, were being diverted via Havant. It's all very well and good. They had a decent number of trains up. When I was heading to the station to head home that day, I was just before 5 o'clock. Every single information system that was based on Darwin said everything was cancelled until I think it was 7:30. So I decided to take it into my own hands and started going another route. So I went on an extra train with plan to get home from Salisbury so that left at 6:20. As I left Waterloo, they reinstated every single train service between 6:20 and the 6:48, which is the 442s. The 6:35 was reinstated 7 minutes before it departed. The 6:48 was reinstated, I think it was 10 minutes before it departed. The problem was they also added stops in to these train services but didn't update any system. I got off at Woking. I knew that the train was going to call there, and a couple of people heard that the train was running. Also got off with me, and I said, no, you can get on this train, it will take you to the right direction. Turns out that the 6:35 train was calling at Woking. The guard knew, the driver knew, no system knew, the staff didn't know. The train just stopped and opened its doors. But to anyone who just wasn't aware, it's a train that's just stopped. You don't know where it's going. And it didn't even say Weymouth on the front or anything like that. So this is where RTT goes wrong. And this is where most industry systems goes wrong. It's not just a problem of systems, it's a problem of process. And the industry has a long way to go on that. But that's where that's where a significant issue is. Anyway, on to more cheery things. RTT has a part of it. It shows minutes to the quarter, timings to the quarter minute. We do this in-house. We've collected our own data set for the entire country, and we review it every year. In some places, we review it a bit more frequently, depending on things like rolling stock changes, infrastructure changes, that kind of thing. We follow a one-size-fits-all approach. So one step, so when you see on a berth map, the kind of train stepping between the black blobs, or whatever colour blobs they are, then the time that happens against that signal, there's what's called an offset, and that gives you a timing in relation to an activity. So that could be arriving, departing at a station, it could be passing a junction, it could be anything like that. That's the kind of approach that the industry generally takes. So there's a system that delivers data into Smart, and it takes that approach as well. And certainly historically, that's the approach that RTT has taken. Underneath the hood of those quarter minutes is actually to the second timings. We're just not confident enough of their accuracy necessarily to show it to anything less than a quarter minute. There's a new approach that we're taking, which has been aided by the availability of rolling stock information and some signaling data, which RTT now uses for the track your train feature, which allows us to do a variation of these offsets, not just based on sort of length of train, but also type of train, different performance characteristics, approach speed, so things like the train's approaching on a yellow or a double yellow rather than a green. It means you're just not assuming the optimal. And you've also got things like diverging routes, so approach controls. So if you've got a junction station, the train turns left instead of going straight ahead. This approach is now in operation on, I think it's two lines in the country. One's way up in Scotland and one is in Anglia. I'm not going to say which ones in particular for various reasons, but they're in place in those areas. And the entire process that we go through to calculate these is a lot of statistical legwork, and also just sitting on trains and timing them with radio controlled watches. So this picture here was me 18 months ago, sitting on a ScotRail train going down towards Carstairs, I think it was, and timing them with my noting down the times with a notebook and just noting down where the train may have been slightly delayed or perturbation, in which case we need to throw out those timings or make an assessment as to whether we think those were reasonable or not. More recently, I've upgraded from notebooks to an iPad, although to be totally honest with you, I genuinely prefer notebooks. I have to digitize it later, but it's so much easier to write it in. Moving on to something else then. Know your train, which is probably the thing which has picked up the most attention in the last 2 years. 18, 20 months ago, I worked with Swanage Railway for their diesel gala to fit their rolling stock with GPS equipment. As part of that, we decided to have a bit of an experimentation with a departure board at Swanage and Corfe Castle Station. On the right, you can see the results of that attempt. We had images of the trains, so the right locomotives, for coaches, and some real-time running information based on the system. I posted a video of that online, and I got quite a lot of reaction. I think it was my most liked tweet, certainly that year. Reactions came from quite a decent spread of the community, and also just random people as well. Anthony Smith, Transport Focus, made a comment. Chris Milner, who's editor of the Railway magazine, and a couple of people from let's say A-Corp, but it's not the right one, the community rail groups, and some general travellers and influencers in the area. That led me to sort of start thinking as to applications of that on the main line. It wasn't the direct thing that caused me to go down this route. That was really getting lucky with ScotRail back in January, but I'll come on to that in a moment. We've now got 6 train operators in action on Know Your Train. 31 unique types of train have been drawn, and there's 156 individual vehicle graphics that are in use. The middle load of those trains on that slide are all of the an example of each operator, while the top one and bottom one, so the 38 stock up at the top and the blue-grey HST at the bottom, were ones that we thought might be amusing to do with my designer for a laugh. Most of those were, the HST was a few months ago, the 38 stock was a couple of weeks ago, because we thought it might be a nice tribute to do as they end at the end of this month. So we've got, as I said, we've got 6 train operators in use, in operation at the moment. I'm hoping for a couple more in the coming weeks. I'm not totally sure yet, but we'll see what happens. But it's certainly been an interesting experience, as I'm sure many people here are aware. The politics of this industry can be fraught, I think is the way I'd describe it. But the moment someone does something, everyone else wants in. And to put it politely, that has been my general experience with it. I have approached in the past quite a few different train operators over the last few years about the possibility of doing something like this. And then this year it all sort of just happened. It's a weird experience, but they've all sort of come in a flurry. So sort of the rough timeline of how it's worked. I've long thought that RTT wasn't really in the industry at all. It sat on the side poking fun at the industry to some degree, and just seeing what I could throw at all and what would stick. Certainly more recently this year, the title of this slide is Small Enthusiast Website, and that was what one railway executive called it about 4 months ago. But I don't think that that's necessarily the case anymore. It definitely would never used to be an industry player. It almost certainly is now, the way I'd look at it. So, I mean, the timeline there, in early 2019, I started talking to GB Rail Freight about doing a couple of bits and bobs with them, and sort of raised the question of numbers, just to see where it would go. I have no personal huge interest in them, certainly for freight trains, but I knew some people would. It might be an interesting thing to experiment with, and so it turned out it was. Don't Tell Cross Country, I think, was probably the instigator of all of this this year. So I don't know if anyone was familiar with it, but I think it was 2nd or 3rd of January, a rail enthusiast asked for Cross Country Twitter feed for the number on a train. They decided to respond to that with they can't give it out for security reasons, and they were ridiculed on the internet, to put it politely. I half jokingly approached someone at ScotRail that I talk to frequently, who I'm imagining is watching this, and we got talking. And 2 months later, I think it was, ScotRail went live. GB Rail Freight preceded them a few days before that, and then it sort of just started happening. LNER I was speaking to just after, and then they went live. Caledonian Sleeper. Northern Cross Country came last October. C2C last month. It's certainly been a bit complicated with the advent of lockdowns, and well, who knows going beyond here. I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, but it's a really hard thing to know what's going to happen on that. The other thing that I should probably point out about this, I'm going to go back to this slide for this one. Know Your Train was born of a need and desire, need's the wrong word, a desire to get better information to customers. At the moment, the industry to this point has said this train's formed of ex-coaches, and in some instances given information about where first class might be, where a toilet might be, but only for very, very few operators and in very few instances. When I've been traveling on the continent, it's been an experience of generally you'll have a good idea as to what the formation of the train is precisely. And they do this on posters at stations, certainly in places like Germany and the Netherlands. I was struggling in my mind to understand why we didn't do that here. And it was when I sit with my passenger hat on, I find it really useful to know what kind of facilities I should be expecting on board. Certainly, and I'm sure many of us have experienced this, getting on board a train expecting plug sockets and then not having them is really frustrating if you need to charge something like your laptop. So when I was working on this, I thought, what would I want as a passenger? What would I like to know? What would benefit me when I'm making my journeys? And also for those who are perhaps less familiar with the railway, what type of train is it? Just knowing and having an idea as to the type of train that is coming for you, certainly in places like Doncaster, Haymarket, they might look all slightly similar or different, but having a better idea as to what type of train you are going to be getting, just by possibly seeing something like the front, whether it's slanted or a front, or indeed in some places where every single type of train looks different, just knowing that is a really reassuring factor when we get on a train. And I hope that the industry sort of can do this more broadly, as knowing something so simple as just what type of train you're going to get can be a really reassuring factor. And certainly in this post-COVID world where we're expecting more leisure travel, we're not necessarily expecting commuters to be coming back so quickly. The role in assisting and assuring possibly infrequent leisure travellers is really vital in sort of uppicking demand onto the rail network. So that's where that's come from. Right. On to something that I've done more recently. It's called Track Your Train. For some reason, all my features seem to end with be word and your train at the moment, but that's where we are. I launched this in September on certain routes from Liverpool Street. It's going to roll out a bit more widely next month. I haven't decided entirely which route it's going to go live next, but it is going to be rolling out more widely. I've been working on this for quite a number of years. When we look at things like signalling data, berth maps, we tend to look at this from a point of view of we know what we should be expecting to see. We know how to interpret a map. We know what the data that is presented to us means. The thing that I've always had in my mind when looking at birth maps was, this is useful for me and I can really gain something valuable out of it. I don't think that another passenger can do that. As they become more experienced with the railway and want to learn more, then it's highly likely that they will be able to learn more and start to understand the birth map. But we should really lower the barrier of entry in understanding how the railway is operating, and more particularly how their service is operating. This is one of those systems where it doesn't necessarily benefit major disruption, although future iterations of it can. It benefits those minor perturbations where you're just trains running randomly slowly in the middle of nowhere. You have no idea where you are, and you just want to know why. And there's no communication whatsoever from any of the train crew, maybe because they're too busy, maybe because they don't know themselves. So I was thinking, how can we develop out a solution in doing something which can basically tell me what a berth map is telling me for my particular train service? And it's mostly been taken up quite well, I believe, from talking to certainly train crew are finding it more useful who operate on those lines, from having spoken to a couple, and passengers, I haven't had much feedback unfortunately on it, but I suspect that's a factor of the fact that I launched it in September, and there's not a huge number of people traveling on the network right now. So I'm hoping that improves next year, as I'm sure we all are, but that's where we are right now. So on the right is a couple of examples of how the system operates. The bottom two are examples from the detailed mode. The top one is an example from the simple mode. All it really does is give you a color-coded indication of how your service is performing based on the signaling data that's available, where the train is, and in the detailed mode it will say where the route's set as far as. That might be useful information based on where you are geographically, certainly for those who are more in the know, hence it's in the detailed mode, and what train it's following. The train following one is something that I didn't necessarily think was useful, but it is something that it is worthwhile. I'm sure we've all been on trains where the train crew might say we're waiting for a slow train in front of us. This way you can understand what train is actually in front of us and look at and understand when it's less likely to cause an issue. I think the one thing that's always slightly perturbed me about this, and I think this graphic explains it quite well. The rail industry, I think, is a little bit, and indeed the internet and humankind in general, once they know a little bit, you think you know everything. And that's been my only concern about doing all of this kind of thing. But I think if we don't push the industry and everyone further in general as to the bounds of the achievable, then we're not necessarily going to go anywhere. We need to constantly be pushing into the realms of what's possible in the future. So it is one of those things, but people will generally think a little bit of data is a lot of knowledge. But I think ultimately, if we can simplify the extremes of the knowledge that are available and information, then we end up with a better railway. So I'm going to go through a little bit of some current and upcoming work that I'm working on, which I hopefully, as I said, see the light of day in the future. One of them is a sort of a COVID project, and the other one is a more derived based on the GPS stuff I showed you a minute ago. But I'll start off with the COVID one. So this is something called RDIS, the Rail Demand Information System. I'm a small cog in this machine, but it is a project designed to give better understanding of how many people are on board every single train service in the country. It uses anonymized data from the mobile network, together with a significant amount of artificial intelligence, in order to basically apply people to trains, understand what kind of journeys people are making, what times of day they are traveling. My part of this project is quite small, and I provide basically the central rail data and understanding, and sort of how we can map the mobile network information down to the train services. This has been something that's taken up, I think I could describe it as my life for the last 7 months. It's been a really interesting and exciting project, certainly as the industry up to this point has never had a centralized view of who's using the trains, indeed where they're going. Every single train operator has their own view on what's going on. There are various systems which track things like ticket sales, reservations, when you use an e-ticket, where you're using it, but no one has ever tried to, that I'm aware of at least, effectively put that all together. We're using mobile data on this, as we're then also able to have a look at a better indication of, say, if you're tracking ticket sales, you don't necessarily know how a season ticket's being used unless it's an e-ticket. So this is, as I say, something I've been working on for 7 months. It runs on a bespoke version of the site, which is available inside the industry to those who are aware of it. And the historic loads are what you can see in the sort of the background screenshot, with the blobs, the red blobs, yellow blobs, green blobs, and the diamonds are probably the more interesting part of this. So the Birmingham to Shrewsbury service there, the diamonds mean it's a forecast. This project is not only trying to analyse passenger loads historically, but it's also trying to forecast train loads in the future, for the entire network every day. This is no small feat, and we have been in a lot of discussions of understanding and knowledge as to how to apply concepts, and understand things like major events, weather events, disruption, and use that data in a more interesting way, or a more compelling way that can help drive the future of the railway, perhaps with train planning, for instance, what train stations might call at, or indeed how long trains might need to be. So that's ARDIS. That's about much I can probably say on it in 5 minutes. As I say, that's been my main preoccupation for the last 7 months. But the next year or so, this is going to be my preoccupation. The Swanage railway system I showed you, which sort of gave birth to the Know Your Train system, which is now available, has been running for 2.5 years now, on mainline registered rolling stock operated by the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. Some of the pictures there are some of the testing and debugging we've had to do. The right hand one is when I had to spend a day on a train just testing different software versions. It's an extremely challenging operating environment. They don't have a lot of mobile phone signal, so the software has to handle that quite elegantly. The trains and the implementation now mean that we only lose data for about 1 or 2 minutes on the entire hour and 20-minute run between Pickering and Whitby, which we're quite pleased with. The middle one is just more debugging on the desk, and the left-hand one is when we were installing the equipment onto the trains. So this is a bespoke system. We didn't buy it off the shelf. We primarily did it bespokely down to the fact that it was slightly cheaper. We could still get it within all the regulations. So there's a number of the different regulations we have to follow, and things like electromagnetic compliance, to get that done. All the antennas have to be within gauge, obviously, on the roof of the Mark 1. So we've done this at relatively low cost. I'm hoping that it goes on to a few more railways in the future. But as I said, it's been in testing for 2 years now. We were hoping to go live this year, but as with most things this year, that didn't go well. And we're now intending to go live next year. The places that they're planning to go with this are things like departure boards at the stations, a more immersive environment, so that you can really understand what type of training you're getting. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Where the train is, and places like Pickering do it in their tea rooms, and other places possibly in their ticket offices. We haven't completely decided yet, but that's certainly where we are going with that. So I think that's everything from me. That was a somewhat speed run of everything that you could want to know. I'm sure there's going to be a few questions as to things I've probably forgotten to say, but thank you all for listening, and I hope you all have a Merry Christmas if I don't have an opportunity to say that towards the end.
Thank you very much, Tom. Very detailed and amusing presentation, I would say, with a lot of references some people will get, and I imagine some people won't get. Reminder, you can send. I have a few questions here, but please keep sending them in. The 7 p.m. is not a hard deadline, but we'll try and aim for around then to call it for questions. I think one that's been asked quite a few times in varying different ways is what's it like behind the scenes? Is it just you, or do you have a team of people, and sort of how has RTT grown? Because sort of if I speak to someone that doesn't know your name, I refer to you as Mr. Realtime Trains. Is it just you?
So at the moment it isn't. I do have an employee at the moment. So I went on a hiring run a couple of months ago to get basically someone who can help do customer queries and things like that. So in terms of employees, it's me plus one. I am probably going to be doing a hiring run again next month if people are interested. I'm probably going to be looking for software developers. Problem is I'm trying to find a clone for myself. So a software developer who knows how trains work. That's like my ultimate ideal goal. That's going to be easier said than done though. Other than that, there are a couple of people who assist with doing things like the data collection for the let's find it there. Data collection for the timings. There's 2 or 3 of us who do it. I tend to do it infrequently, personally, as I'm busy with lots of other things. But I will take any opportunity to go to Scotland that I can. And so most pictures that I have of me doing it are from ScotRail trains.
You'll see people like me to go and take photos of trains, trying to find out where certain things are.
Yeah.
So I'm quite good at combining questions here. Did you envisage RTT becoming a business project when you started out, or was it purely from annoyance of commuting? And on the back of this, how has that sort of led you towards commercial perspectives within the industry?
The quick answer is no. It was a hobby project. I began to understand the commercials, or more the way it would expand, towards the end of my time at university. I was getting approached by a couple of different companies who I have subsequently done work for. Some of them wanted to license real-time trains. Some of them just wanted me to do consultancy work for them. I think subsequently I've become I wouldn't necessarily have become more aware of the commercials of it. So I run RTT on a basis of, I try to run it as lean cost as possible. So RTT itself, I always aim for it to pay for itself. So it's funded through things like ad revenue and a couple of licensing agreements. The consultancy that I do is something on the side. Anything that I've done with operators more recently, so things like Know Your Train, I haven't charged the operators a penny for, and I intend to pay for it through deriving revenue from increased traffic. Obviously, that's a bit more challenging, but I don't think that the industry should be spending insane amounts of money if it can do it without spending insane amounts of money. So my commercial perspective is that the industry has a lot of bloat to some degree in spending cash. And I try with RTT, if an operator wishes to work with me, I will try and do it as low cost as possible if it can go on RTT. If it's consultancy, it's slightly different because you're buying my time. But that's sort of where I come to on it. I think the thing that it has opened my eyes up to is the politics of the industry. I found that, I think certainly as an enthusiast way back when, and indeed people coming up now, will be aware of the various bits and bobs of what happen internally and think that they will understand it if they go and work in it. And you sort of, I know when I was younger, I'd think that, okay, I can believe that. And in reality, then when you go and find out the real truth later, you go, oh, okay, it was completely different. I think it's a case of the more you work in this industry, you get more of a canny ability to understand the politics of something that you're about to do and something that has happened. And for RTT, I understand them. I mostly ignore them because I don't care much for them. And I try and deliver something without worrying too much about it. And at times that has caused me problems, quite considerable ones. But my ultimate goal has always been, I want to improve. The end question is, how can I improve my travel experience? How can I improve my journeys? If I can improve my journeys, I can probably improve everyone else's journeys. And that is where I don't think I've ever diverged from that. And I don't think I ever will while I run it. That was quite
Question
long.
here. Well, you answered the question, put it that way.
Yeah.
Question about know your train.
Yeah.
So someone can imagine there might be a situation where someone boards the wrong train because despite the fact it's a different livery to what's shown on the screen. Have you got all different livery variations of all the different types of stock? So for example, let's try and think. Obviously LNER, for example, have different color Zoomers and 91 sets.
Yeah. The answer is yes, where it's been possible. It's not always possible. So the thing I've always said is know your train requires you to know what the number of the train is. So the interesting thing, I think, when in the enthusiast world is you sort of have these people that desperately want numbers because they want the numbers. Whereas for Know Your Train, I wanted the numbers because I thought I can do something really interesting with the numbers and still not care much for them. So by knowing the numbers, I can know what livery of the train will be, and therefore I can improve the passenger experience from it from a different digit. So we have got, I think ScotRail 170s are the only problematic ones, but in general, yes, we have every single livery drawn, and it's cost me quite a lot of money to do
it. Question here from our very own Matt Teller, who heads up the heritage aspect of Young Rail Professionals. Has there been any interest in deploying the GPS data and technology from preserved real-time trains to improve information on more rural lines, so sort of where the signalling data isn't that reliable? Could you use more modern units with a GPS signal?
Yes, so the industry already does this a bit. They've got quite a lot of, I'm going to pick out Northern here. Northern trains are fitted with GPS. I think a couple of ScotRail ones are as well. And that infills via trust GPS data, basically GPS timings into it. I don't think that it's necessarily all that reliable. I have spotted a number of issues with it in the past. And I question some of the timings that it comes out with. But there is the industry. I think the answer is yes. The industry already does it though, but there's nothing necessarily stopping the algorithms that I've used for preserved trains to slot in quite nicely. As anyone who's known me from a software development perspective, I obsess over the edge case and detail, and inevitably get things wrong on the main problem. But it's now a pretty reliable product. But it's not a perfect thing at the moment, and I would love to get my hands onto GPS mainline GPS data, but at some point.
This one for me on the back of that. Do you ever foresee a situation where you're tracking a train via GPS and it resorts to 00, and you start reporting trains in the middle of the ocean?
I've done that. I've done that. Yes, I've done that with a preserved system. It has happened, primarily in tunnels. I wrote code to fix that in the end, but yeah, I have done that.
You can just imagine a 153 bombing in the ocean. Um,
I'd like to see a Photoshop of that if someone has time.
um, one area that's quite interesting, obviously from a general public perspective, the passenger information aspect of real-time trains is really useful. Um, Somebody asked, does real-time trains have the functionality to track freight trains? But on top of that, I'm wondering, is there any sort of benefit of using real-time trains within the freight world, do you reckon?
Um, so yes, it can track freight trains to begin with. Detailed mode obviously does. Um, are there benefits of using it? I think there is. So there's when I've been speaking to people from freight operators, their customers tend to not have a clue where the trains are. And I'm aware that there are products that allow you to better track where, say, containers are or things like that. But there is a world of possibility to certainly if we were trying to, for instance, move sort of package transit, so the likes of the major couriers that we have, and trying to move them onto rail, there's something I reckon, as a lot of them now track by road, in allowing your full end-to-end journey to be tracked a lot better, because you know where the train is. So in the freight world, there's a huge amount of possibility, and I'm talking to quite a few people every now and again about it. Um, uh, it's it's a really complicated niche, and I'm sure that something will happen in future. But at the moment, I've certainly not been involved in anything like that, although I'd love to be.
Obviously, with all these, believe you briefly mentioned it earlier, with getting all sort of the allocation data from operators and the like, are you doing anything to try and make this open data
Yes,
during your
yes.
investigations? Is that the right word?
Yeah, yeah. No, I am trying to do my best. The biggest political hurdle, I think, was getting it in the public domain. The next political hurdle is getting it open data. And the problem is with the open data is who needs to take ownership of a product which outputs that. Um, and I think we all have our opinions as to who that should be. Whether it's right or not is a different question. The ownership of the data at the moment is generally considered to be with the train operators, and it has been a challenge, I think is the right description, even if they're coming to me, of getting agreements with it's 8 different train operators now, including those who give allocations. It's been a challenge to get the agreement of some of them, and I think it's been made easier for me now that RTT is a trusted industry party. I personally think that it should be open because it's a number at the end of the day. And I am trying my best to nudge people that way. I think the more that agree to go in the public domain, the easier the open conversation becomes, and then it's a problem of who needs to own it. But the short answer is yes, the long answer is that.
Here's an interesting one. It mentions further plans, but I'm not currently aware of any plans. But obviously, rail miles is a paid feature. Is there ever going to
Yeah,
be sort of a monetized version or a paid version of real-time trains which has more features or could be used within the industry?
yes. um, yeah, there will be. Um, there is an industry targeted version, which is available to industry parties if they want it. In terms of the general public, there will be, but it will be for aiding things like better history, so helping people delay repay claims and historically things like that. I just frankly haven't got around to it yet. I was going to do it during the COVID lockdown, the first COVID lockdown, and then events overtook myself, and I ended up working on the artist project rather than that.
And if we look at that, we're at precisely 7 p.m. So I'll end with one more question, if that's all right, Tom.
Yeah, go
It
for
seems
it.
like I've saved it to round off because it seems quite a
Uh
nice one. For all your achievements within RTT and otherwise, which are you most proud of?
oh, that's hmm. I think it's got to be Know Your Train. The idea of having having images of trains in an industry which has been so closed up about it, and being able to better understand facilities and things like that, I think to me has been, in terms of the potential passenger and customer impact, I think that's the thing that I'm most proud of. It's also been the most challenging to do, which is a different problem, but I definitely think it's that.
I'm still waiting for the sprites of the Class 50s to appear on GBRF trains. That's still got to
Spotted.
happen at some point. Thank you very much, Tom. We will end it there. Before I do my a big sign off about Young Rail Professionals, I just want to let you know of a save the date. I was hoping to have this live on the website by today, but to be honest, I've run out of time with my day job. On Wednesday, the 20th of January at 6 p.m., which is coincidentally the 5-year anniversary I started working in the rail industry, I have Martin Spinks from Network Rail coming to talk to us all about their infrastructure monitoring fleet, otherwise known as the Network Rail test trains. So that's everything from your high-speed NMTs, new measurement trains, all the way down to the 2-car 150 that potters around the branch lines. So put that in your diary. It should be live on the website by the end of the week. And other than that, have a very Merry Christmas and a great New Year. If you want to find out more, please visit our website at youngrailpro.com and make sure to sign up to the Western Region section of the website. We'll be very grateful to have you and any input you'd like for our program in the new year. I hope you all have a good evening.